The morning sun cast a deceptive glow over the quiet streets of Maplewood, its golden rays filtering through the neatly trimmed hedges and manicured lawns that defined the suburban enclave. But beneath the serene facade, a restless energy pulsed, as if the very air sensed the storm that was about to descend. Marissa Caldwell stood on her front porch, her hands steadying the wheelchair of her daughter, Leah, whose bright hazel eyes scanned the world with a mix of innocence and quiet defiance. At 12 years old, Leah's spirit was a beacon of resilience, her disability never dimming the spark that made her extraordinary. Yet, as Marissa adjusted the blanket over Leah's lap, a familiar dread coiled in her chest, a weight that had grown heavier with every passing day in this neighborhood. Turned battleground. For years their home had been a target, not of vandals or thieves, but of something far more insidious. Evelyn Harper, the HOA president whose obsession with control had transformed their lives into a relentless gauntlet of harassment. Evelyn's cold, calculating smile was a fixture in Marissa's nightmares, her piercing gaze a constant reminder that no infraction, real or imagined, escaped her scrutiny. From the moment Marissa and Leah had moved into Maplewood, Evelyn had mocked them, her disdain for Leah's vulnerability palpable in every snide comment about their garden, every late-night letter citing trivial violations, every unexpected appearance that left Marissa's heart racing. But it was the way Evelyn seemed to relish Leah's fragility, as if it were a personal affront to her meticulously ordered world, that chilled Marissa to her core. This morning, the tension felt different, thicker, more oppressive, as if the air itself crackled with an unspoken warning. Marissa wheeled Leah onto the porch, the sunlight glinting off the chrome handlebars of her chair, the gentle hum of the neighborhood masking the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Leah's small hand gripped Marissa's, her fingers trembling slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the unease they both felt. Marissa forced a smile, brushing a strand of Leah's dark hair from her forehead, but her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. The memory of Evelyn cornering Leah by the community pool the previous day burned vividly, her venomous words cloaked in civility, her eyes gleaming with malice, and the fear in Leah's gaze that had haunted Marissa through a sleepless night. "Good morning, sweetheart," Marissa said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of anxiety within her. "It's going to be a beautiful day." The lie tasted bitter, but she couldn't bear to let Leah see her fear. Leah's lips curved into a trembling smile, her hazel eyes searching Marissa's face for reassurance. "I know, Mom," she whispered, her voice small but resolute. "But she's watching again, isn't she?" Marissa's heart skipped a beat, her gaze darting instinctively to the street. There, rolling slowly past their house, was Evelyn's black SUV, its tinted windows reflecting the morning light like the eyes of a predator. The vehicle lingered, its engine idling with a low, menacing hum, and Marissa could feel Evelyn's gaze boring into them, a silent promise of something far worse than the petty complaints of the past. A shiver ran down her spine, her grip tightening on Leah's wheelchair as she positioned herself protectively between her daughter and the street. "She's just driving by, Leah," Marissa said, forcing calmness into her tone. Nothing to worry about, but the words felt hollow and Leah's eyes flickered with doubt. The girl's intuition was sharp, honed by years of navigating a world that wasn't always kind to her. She sensed the danger as keenly as Marissa did, and the knowledge that her daughter felt the same electric tension in the air made Marissa's stomach twist. Evelyn's SUV finally moved on, disappearing around the corner, but the weight of her presence lingered like a storm cloud. Marissa's mind replayed the countless incidents that had built to this moment. The anonymous notes slipped under their door, the fines for non-compliant flowerbeds, the way Evelyn would stand at the edge of their property line, her arms crossed, her lips curled into a smile that never reached her eyes. Each act had been a jab, a test of Marissa's resolve, but today felt different. Today, the air held a charge that whispered of something final, something catastrophic. Marissa wheeled Leia back inside, the click of the door locking behind them sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet house. She busied herself with breakfast, trying to anchor herself in routine, but her hands shook as she poured orange juice into a glass. Leia watched her silently, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting Evelyn to materialize at any moment. The normalcy of the morning felt like a fragile veneer, ready to shatter with the slightest pressure. As Marissa set a plate of toast in front of Leia, the doorbell rang, sharp and jarring. Her heart leapt into her throat, her pulse pounding as she glanced at the clock. Barely 8 a.m. Too early for visitors, too deliberate to be a coincidence. Leia stiffened, her eyes wide, and Marissa forced a reassuring smile before crossing to the door. Through the peephole, she saw Evelyn standing on the porch, impeccably dressed in her signature navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a flawless bun. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but the tilt of her head and the faint curve of her lips radiated a chilling confidence. Marissa's hand hovered over the doorknob, every instinct screaming to keep the door locked, to barricade themselves against whatever Evelyn had planned. But she knew avoidance would only delay the inevitable. Steeling herself, she opened the door, keeping her body positioned to block Evelyn's view of Leia. "Good morning, Marissa," Evelyn said, her voice syrupy sweet, edged with a steel that made Marissa's skin crawl. "I see we're enjoying the sunshine again. How fortunate." Her gaze flicked past Marissa, landing on Leia, who sat frozen at the kitchen table. The brief glance was enough to make Marissa's blood run cold, the calculated coldness in Evelyn's eyes measuring Leia's delicate frame as if plotting something unspeakable. "What do you want, Evelyn?" Marissa asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. She gripped the doorframe, anchoring herself against the rising tide of fear. Evelyn's smile widened, a predator's grin. "Oh, just a neighborly visit," she said, her tone dripping with false warmth. "We have a hearing today, don't we? I thought it only polite to remind you. Wouldn't want you to be late." Her fingers brushed against the edge of her blazer, a subtle movement that drew Marissa's attention to a small, metallic object clipped to her belt. Device that emitted a faint hum, barely audible, but enough to make Marissa's stomach lurch. "We're aware of the hearing," Marissa said, her voice tight. "We'll be there." She moved to close the door, but Evelyn's hand shot out, stopping it with a gentle but firm touch. "Excellent," Evelyn purred, her eyes glinting behind her sunglasses. "I do hope Leia's feeling up to it. It's such an important day." The way she lingered on Leia's name sent a chill through Marissa, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. Marissa shut the door as soon as Evelyn stepped back, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She turned to Leia, who was staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Mom, what's she going to do?" Leia whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know, sweetheart," Marissa admitted, kneeling beside her daughter and taking her hands. "But We're going to face her together. She can't hurt us if we stay strong." The words felt like a prayer, a desperate hope against the growing certainty that Evelyn's plan was far more sinister than anything they'd faced before. The hours leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and dread. Marissa helped Leia into a simple dress, her fingers fumbling with the buttons as her mind raced. The hearing was meant to address Evelyn's latest complaints, petty disputes over property lines and alleged violations that Marissa knew were fabricated. But the memory of Evelyn's visit, the hum of that strange device, and the malicious gleam in her eyes suggested something far worse than a legal dispute awaited them. As they arrived at the Maplewood courthouse, the building's polished marble floors and high ceilings felt less like a sanctuary of justice and more like a stage for Evelyn's cruelty. The air buzzed with the low hum of attorneys preparing their cases, the occasional bang of a gavel echoing from distant chambers. Marissa wheeled Leia into the courtroom, her hands trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. Leia's fingers gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her eyes darting nervously as she sensed the invisible threat that had followed them from their home. Evelyn was already there, seated at the defendant's table, her posture impeccable, her navy blazer a stark contrast to the sterile courtroom. Her sunglasses were gone, revealing eyes that tracked Leia with a predator's precision. Marissa's stomach twisted as she caught the faint smirk on Evelyn's lips, a silent promise that this hearing would be anything but routine. The judge, Richard Lanson, entered, his stern demeanor commanding silence. He nodded politely as the proceedings began, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the courtroom's veneer of civility. Evelyn's attorney spoke first, weaving a narrative of neighborly disputes and minor infractions, painting Evelyn as a paragon of community standards. But Marissa could see the way Evelyn's gaze lingered on Leia, the subtle gestures she made, a hand brushing against her briefcase, a faint hum emanating from her side, that hinted at something far more dangerous. Marissa's attorney countered with facts, presenting evidence of Evelyn's harassment, from the anonymous letters to the poolside confrontation. But the air grew heavier with each passing minute, the tension coiling tighter as Evelyn's movements became more deliberate. Marissa noticed a small, metallic object near Evelyn's podium, its faint glow catching the light in a way that made her pulse quicken. Leia stiffened beside her, her breathing shallow, as if she too sensed the danger. "Mom," Leia whispered, her voice barely audible, "something's wrong." "I know," Marissa murmured, squeezing her daughter's hand. She scanned the room, searching for any sign of intervention, but the jurors, the audience, and even the judge remained oblivious, engrossed in the legal arguments. The hum from Evelyn's side grew louder, a subtle crackle that made Marissa's skin prickle. She wanted to scream, to demand that someone stop whatever was about to happen, but her voice caught in her throat, paralyzed by the certainty that they were trapped in Evelyn's meticulously orchestrated theater of cruelty. As the first witnesses were called, Marissa's heart pounded with every word, every accusation, every glance from Evelyn that seemed to grow darker, more menacing. She saw Evelyn adjust the metallic object, her movements smooth and deliberate, and the realization hit Marissa like a physical blow. Whatever Evelyn had planned was no longer just a threat. It was imminent, poised to erupt in a moment of shocking violence that would leave the entire courtroom paralyzed. The judge called for a brief recess, and the room seemed to exhale. The tension momentarily diffused. Marissa wheeled Leia out of the courtroom, her hands shaking violently as she tried to shield her daughter from Evelyn's gaze. But even as they moved, Evelyn's presence shadowed them, her lips curling into a smile that chilled Marissa to the bone. The courtroom doors swung shut behind them, but the dread remained, a suffocating weight that pressed down on Marissa's chest. She knelt beside Leia, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. "We're going to get through this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise." But as they returned to their seats, the room falling into an uneasy silence, Marissa knew with chilling certainty that the worst was yet to come. The subtle hum from Evelyn's side, the calculated coldness in her eyes, and the oppressive weight of the courtroom all pointed to a single, horrifying truth. Whatever Evelyn had planned for Leia was not just cruel, it was unimaginable. And as the proceedings resumed, Marissa clutched Leia's hand, praying for a miracle to intervene, fully aware that the nightmare they had feared for years was about to become their horrifying reality. The courtroom doors swung open again, and the air seemed to thicken. Each breath Marissa Caldwell took laced with the weight of impending doom. She wheeled Leia back to their seats, her hands trembling as she locked the wheelchair's brakes with a click that echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence. Leia's hazel eyes darted nervously, her small frame rigid with the same unspoken fear that gripped Marissa's heart. The room buzzed with the low hum of anticipation, the jurors settling back into their seats, the attorneys shuffling papers, and the judge, Richard Lanson, adjusting his glasses as he prepared to resume the proceedings. But for Marissa, the world had narrowed to the cold, calculating presence of Evelyn Harper, seated across the room, her navy blazer pristine, her posture a mockery of civility. Evelyn's gaze locked onto Leia, a predator's stare that made Marissa's skin crawl. The faint hum from the metallic object near Evelyn's podium had grown louder during the recess, a subtle but persistent sound that gnawed at Marissa's nerves. She wanted to believe it was nothing, a trick of her anxious mind, but the way Evelyn's fingers brushed lightly against the device, her lips curling into a barely perceptible smirk, told a different story. This was no ordinary hearing, no simple dispute over property lines or HOA violations. This was a stage, and Evelyn was the director of a performance Marissa could feel building toward a devastating crescendo. The judge banged his gavel, calling the court to order, and the room fell into a strained hush. Marissa squeezed Leia's hand, her daughter's fingers cold and trembling despite the warmth of the courtroom. "Stay strong, sweetheart," Marissa whispered, her voice barely audible. Leia nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes betrayed the fear she was trying so hard to conceal. Marissa's heart ached at the sight, the weight of her daughter's courage in the face of such menace almost too much to bear. Evelyn's attorney rose, his voice smooth and confident as he continued weaving a narrative of community standards and minor infractions. He presented a series of documents, photos of Marissa's garden, letters citing alleged violations, and testimonies from neighbors who claimed to support Evelyn's crusade for order. But Marissa could see the cracks in the facade, the way the jurors' eyes flickered with doubt, the subtle shift in their postures as they sensed the undercurrent of malice beneath the polished presentation. Evelyn, however, remained unshaken, her gaze never wavering from Leia, as if she were measuring her daughter's every breath, calculating the precise moment to strike. Marissa's attorney, a wiry man named David Klein, stood to counter, his voice steady but laced with urgency. He presented evidence of Evelyn's harassment campaign. The anonymous letters slipped under their door, the fines issued without proof, the poolside confrontation that had left Leah shaken. He called their first witness, a neighbor named Mrs. Ellison, who had witnessed Evelyn's behavior and was willing to testify to her relentless targeting of Marissa and Leah. Mrs. Ellison, a frail woman in her 60s, took the stand with a nervous glance at Evelyn, her hands trembling as she recounted the HOA president's obsessive oversight of their street. She would stand outside their house for hours, Mrs. Ellison said, her voice quavering. I saw her once, just staring at Leah while she played on the porch. It wasn't normal, it was like she was waiting for something. Marissa's pulse quickened, her grip on Leah's hand tightening. The testimony was damning, a glimpse into the depth of Evelyn's fixation, but it also felt like a spark in a powder keg. Evelyn's expression remained impassive, but her fingers twitched slightly, brushing against the metallic object at her side. The hum grew louder, a faint crackle that made Marissa's stomach lurch. She leaned closer to Leah, whispering, "It's okay, we're going to be okay." But the words felt like a fragile shield against the storm she could feel gathering. The judge nodded, his face unreadable, as Mrs. Ellison stepped down. David called their next witness, a former HOA board member who had resigned after clashing with Evelyn over her tactics. His testimony was more pointed, detailing how Evelyn had manipulated records, fabricated violations, and used her authority to intimidate anyone who challenged her. She had a particular focus on the Caldwells, he said, glancing at Marissa with sympathy. It was like she saw them, especially Leah, as a threat to her control. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth, and Marissa could feel the jurors' attention sharpen, their eyes darting between Evelyn and Leah. But Evelyn's composure never faltered. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers grazing the device again, and the hum intensified, a low, menacing sound that seemed to vibrate through the room. Marissa's heart pounded, her eyes scanning the courtroom for any sign of intervention, but the bailiff stood impassive, the judge focused on his notes, and the audience remained oblivious to the danger. "Mom," Leah whispered, her voice trembling, that sound, it's coming from her. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Evelyn, and Marissa could see the fear etched into her daughter's face. She wanted to scoop Leah up and run, to escape the suffocating tension of the courtroom, but they were trapped, bound by the legal process and Evelyn's unrelenting gaze. David noticed Marissa's distress and paused, his eyes flicking to Evelyn's podium. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cautious but firm, "I'd like to request a brief inspection of the defendant's materials. There's an unusual sound coming from her side of the courtroom that's causing concern." The judge raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting to Evelyn, who tilted her head with an air of mock innocence. "I'm sure it's nothing, Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Perhaps a phone or a pen. These things happen." But the faint smirk on her lips betrayed her, and Marissa's stomach twisted with dread. Judge Lanson hesitated, then nodded to the bailiff. "Check it," he said curtly. The bailiff approached Evelyn's podium, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he too sensed the undercurrent of danger. Marissa held her breath, her hand gripping Leah so tightly she feared she might hurt her. The bailiff leaned over, inspecting the area, and for a moment the hum ceased, the silence so abrupt it felt like a vacuum. "Nothing unusual, Your Honor," the bailiff reported, stepping back. "Just a pen and some papers." Marissa's heart sank. her eyes darting to Evelyn, who leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. The hum resumed, softer now, but unmistakable, a reminder that whatever Evelyn had planned was still in motion. David exchanged a glance with Marissa, his expression a mix of frustration and unease, but he pressed on, calling their next witness. As the testimony continued, Marissa's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of Evelyn's behavior. The device, the hum, the calculated glances. She remembered a news article she'd read months ago about a woman who had used a modified stun device to intimidate a neighbor. The thought sent a chill through her, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. Evelyn wasn't here to win a legal battle. She was here to assert her dominance, to punish Leah for daring to exist in her perfect world. The courtroom grew warmer, the air thick with the weight of unspoken fear. Leah's breathing grew shallow, her fingers clutching the armrests of her wheelchair, and Marissa whispered reassurances, her own voice trembling. The witnesses came and went, each adding to the portrait of Evelyn's obsession, but the hum persisted, a constant reminder of the danger lurking just out of sight. Marissa's eyes darted to the jurors, who were now visibly uneasy, their glances shifting to Evelyn with growing suspicion. Even the judge seemed to sense the shift, his brow furrowing as he listened to the testimony. Evelyn's attorney called a rebuttal witness, a neighbor who claimed Marissa had been the aggressor, fabricating complaints to discredit Evelyn. The testimony was flimsy, riddled with inconsistencies, but Evelyn's calm demeanor lent it an air of credibility. She sat poised, her hands folded, but her eyes never left Leah, a silent promise of something far worse than words. Marissa's pulse quickened, her mind screaming warnings she couldn't voice. The hum grew louder again, a crackle that seemed to vibrate through her bones, and she realized with a sinking dread that time was running out. "Mom, I'm scared," Leah whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes were fixed on Evelyn, who leaned forward slightly, her fingers brushing the device with a deliberate slowness that made Marissa's blood run cold. The courtroom seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the tension coiled tighter, a spring ready to snap. "I'm here, Leah," Marissa said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. "I won't let anything happen to you." But the words felt like a desperate plea, a prayer against the inevitability of Evelyn's plan. She scanned the room again, searching for any ally, any sign of intervention, but the bailiff stood at ease. The judge scribbled notes, and the audience watched with rapt attention, unaware of the catastrophe looming. The testimony droned on, but Marissa's focus was on Evelyn, whose movements grew more pronounced, her fingers lingering on the device with a calculated precision. The hum intensified, a low buzz that seemed to resonate with the fluorescent lights above, casting flickering shadows across the room. Marissa's heart hammered against her ribs, her breath catching as she realized the moment was approaching, the moment Evelyn had been orchestrating all along. David concluded his questioning, his voice tinged with urgency as he sensed the same danger Marissa did. He turned to the judge, his expression grim. "Your Honor, I renew my request for an inspection. The sound is persistent, and it's causing distress to my clients." Before the judge could respond, Evelyn stood, her movement sudden and startling. "Your Honor, if I may," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, "this is a distraction, a tactic to derail the proceedings. I assure you, there's nothing to inspect." But as she spoke, her hand brushed the device, and a faint spark flickered at her fingertips, so brief it might have gone unnoticed. But Marissa saw it, and her heart stopped. The judge hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he studied Evelyn. "Ms. Harper, sit down," he said, his tone sharp. "Bailiff, check again, thoroughly." The bailiff moved toward Evelyn's podium, but before he could reach it, a sharp crackle split the air, a sound that made Marissa's blood freeze. Leah gasped, her body tensing, and Marissa instinctively pulled her daughter closer, shielding her with her own body. The hum had become a low, menacing buzz, and Evelyn's eyes gleamed with a malicious satisfaction that sent a shiver through Marissa's spine. "Stop her!" Marissa shouted, her voice raw with panic, but the bailiff was already moving, his hand outstretched toward Evelyn's podium. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, the jurors leaning forward, the audience shifting uneasily. Evelyn's smile widened, her fingers closing around the device, and Marissa realized with horrifying clarity that they were out of time. The bailiff reached for the object, but Evelyn's hand moved faster, a subtle flick that sent a spark arcing through the air. The crackle grew louder, the fluorescent lights flickering violently, and Marissa's scream caught in her throat as she saw the spark leap toward Leah's wheelchair. The metal frame glowed briefly, a terrifying pulse of electricity that made Leah cry out, her small body jerking in pain. Chaos erupted. Jurors leapt from their seats, attorneys shouted, and the judge slammed his gavel, his face pale with shock. Marissa lunged forward, trying to pull Leah away from the wheelchair, but the current held her daughter in its grip, a merciless force that made her tremble uncontrollably. The smell of burning metal and ozone filled the air, a sickening reminder of the violence unfolding before them. "Help her!" Marissa screamed, her voice tearing through the pandemonium. She clawed at the wheelchair, desperate to break the connection, but the sparks danced around her hands, stinging her skin. Leah's cries pierced her heart, each sound a dagger that fueled her rage and helplessness. The bailiff tackled Evelyn, wrenching the device from her hand, and the hum ceased abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Marissa pulled Leah into her arms, her daughter's body shaking violently, her breathing ragged. Tears streamed down Marissa's face as she held her close, whispering frantic reassurances. "You're okay, she said, though the words felt like a lie. The courtroom was a blur of motion. Jurors shouting, attorneys scrambling, the judge banging his gavel repeatedly, his voice lost in the chaos. Evelyn stood, restrained by the bailiff, her expression unnervingly calm. Her eyes met Marissa's, and the faint smile on her lips was a chilling testament to her satisfaction. She had planned this moment, orchestrated it with precision, and even as she was led away, her gaze lingered on Leah, a silent promise that her cruelty was far from over. The judge called for order, his face ashen as he struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. "Clear the courtroom," he shouted, his voice shaking. "This hearing is adjourned until further notice." But Marissa barely heard him, her focus entirely on Leah, whose tremors were beginning to subside, though her eyes remained wide with terror. Paramedics rushed in, their movements a blur as they checked Leah's vitals, their voices calm but urgent. Marissa clung to her daughter, refusing to let go, her own body trembling with a mix of rage, fear, and grief. The courtroom emptied, the audience murmuring in shock, their whispers a cacophony of disbelief. How could this happen? In a courtroom? That poor girl? As the paramedics wheeled Leah toward an ambulance, Marissa followed, her mind a storm of emotions. The image of Evelyn's smile, the sound of Leah's cries, and the judge's stunned expression replayed in a relentless loop. She knew this was not the end. Evelyn's obsession ran too deep, her malice too calculated, but as she held Leia's hand, feeling the warmth of her daughter's grip, Marissa felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. They had survived this horror, and they would not let Evelyn win. The ambulance doors closed, and as they sped toward the hospital, Marissa whispered to Leia, "We're going to fight, sweetheart. She won't break us." Leia's eyes, still clouded with fear, met hers, and a faint nod signaled her agreement. The storm had struck, but they were still standing, and Marissa vowed that the next chapter of their fight would see Evelyn's reign of terror brought to an end. The ambulance siren wailed through the streets of Maplewood, its piercing cry a stark contrast to the suffocating silence that had engulfed Marissa Caldwell as she clung to her daughter Leia's hand. The paramedics worked with calm efficiency, their voices a low hum as they monitored Leia's vitals, but Marissa's world had narrowed to the rapid rise and fall of her daughter's chest, the faint tremors still coursing through her small frame, and the wide, frightened hazel eyes that searched her own for reassurance. The memory of the courtroom, sparks flying, Leia's cries of pain, and Evelyn Harper's chilling smile played in a relentless loop, each image a dagger twisting in Marissa's heart. She whispered soft words of comfort, her voice trembling, but the weight of guilt, rage, and helplessness pressed down on her like a physical force. The hospital loomed ahead, its stark white walls and sterile corridors a jarring shift from the polished chaos of the courtroom. As the paramedics wheeled Leia into the emergency room, Marissa followed, her legs unsteady, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The smell of antiseptic stung her nose, mingling with the lingering scent of burnt metal and ozone from the courtroom attack. Nurses moved swiftly, their faces masks of professionalism, but Marissa caught the fleeting glances of shock and sympathy as they took in Leia's pale skin and trembling form. A doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind but focused eyes, approached, her clipboard a shield against the emotional storm unfolding before her. "Mrs. Caldwell," the doctor said, her voice steady, "we're going to run some tests to ensure Leia's stable. The electrical shock was brief, but we need to check for any lingering effects on her heart and nervous system." She hesitated, her gaze softening. "She's strong, and we'll take good care of her." Marissa nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She squeezed Leia's hand, forcing a smile as the nurses wheeled her daughter toward an examination room. "I'll be right here, sweetheart," she managed, her voice cracking. Leia's lips quivered, but she nodded, her eyes reflecting a courage that made Marissa's heart ache. As the doors swung shut, Marissa sank into a plastic chair in the waiting area, her body trembling with the aftershocks of fear and rage. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a cruel echo of the device Evelyn had used to attack her daughter, and Marissa's mind spiraled back to the courtroom, to the moment when justice had failed them in the most horrifying way. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out with shaking hands. It was David Klein, their attorney, his voice urgent but controlled. "Marissa, I'm at the courthouse. Evelyn's been detained, and the police are analyzing the device. It's some kind of modified stun mechanism, rigged to deliver a targeted shock. We're building a case for attempted assault, maybe worse. How's Leia? They're running tests." Marissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "David, how did this happen? In a courtroom? How could she?" Her words trailed off, choked by a sob she couldn't suppress. "I know," David said, his tone heavy with shared disbelief. "The judge is shaken, Marissa. He's ordered an immediate investigation, and the media's already swarming. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore, it's a public scandal. We're going to make sure Evelyn faces the consequences." Marissa nodded, though he couldn't see her, her mind racing with images of Evelyn's cold, calculating smile. She planned this, David, every step. She wanted to hurt Leia, to show she could control us, even in a courtroom. Her voice hardened, a spark of defiance cutting through the grief. "We can't let her get away with this." "We won't," David promised. "I'm meeting with the prosecutor in an hour. Stay with Leia, and I'll keep you updated. We're going to fight this, Marissa, for Leia." The call ended, and Marissa sat in the sterile waiting room, the weight of the day pressing down on her. She could still hear Leia's cries, feel the helpless panic as she tried to shield her daughter from the electric current. The image of Judge Lanson's ashen face, his gavel frozen midair, lingered like a ghost. He had seen the unthinkable, a child attacked in his courtroom, the sanctity of justice violated in a way that defied comprehension. Marissa knew that image would haunt him, just as it haunted her, but she also knew it could be the key to ensuring Evelyn's downfall. Hours passed in a blur of medical updates and whispered reassurances. The doctor returned, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Leia's stable," she said. "The shock caused some muscle spasms and elevated heart rate, but there's no permanent damage we can detect. She's shaken, though, and we'd like to keep her overnight for observation." Marissa exhaled, a shaky breath of relief mingling with the ever-present dread. "Can I see her?" she asked, her voice raw. "Of course," the doctor said, leading her to Leia's room. Marissa's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter, small and fragile in the hospital bed, and Roman IV lines snaking from her arm. But Leia's eyes brightened when she saw her mother, a faint smile breaking through the fear. "Mom," Leia whispered, her voice hoarse. "I was so scared." "I know, sweetheart," Marissa said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "But you were so brave. I'm so proud of you." Tears stung her eyes, but she forced them back, determined to be strong for her daughter. "We're going to be okay, I promise." Leia nodded, her fingers tightening around Marissa's. "She can't hurt me again, right?" Her voice trembled, and Marissa's heart broke at the vulnerability in her daughter's words. "No," Marissa said firmly, though the promise felt like a fragile shield against the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "She's going to face justice. We'll make sure of it." As Leia drifted into a fitful sleep, Marissa's phone buzzed again. It was David, his voice urgent. "Marissa, the prosecutor's office is moving fast. They've charged Evelyn with aggravated assault and reckless endangerment, and they are pushing for a swift arraignment. The media's calling it the HOA horror, and public outrage is building. We've got witnesses from the courtroom, forensic evidence, and the judge himself is cooperating fully. This is winnable." Marissa's grip tightened on the phone, a spark of hope igniting amidst the grief. "What happens next?" she asked. "We're preparing for a preliminary hearing tomorrow," David said. "Evelyn's being held without bail. Her stunt in the courtroom didn't exactly help her case. I need you and Leia to be ready to testify if she's up for it." Her voice could be the key to sealing this. Marissa glanced at Leia, her daughter's chest rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. The thought of putting her back in a courtroom, facing Evelyn again, made Marissa's stomach twist, but she knew Leia's courage could turn the tide. "I'll talk to her," she said. "She's strong, David, stronger than anyone realizes." "Good," David said. "I'll be by later to go over the details. Stay strong, Marissa. We're going to end this." The hospital room grew quiet, the only sounds the soft beeping of machines and Leia's steady breathing. Marissa sat by her daughter's side, her mind a storm of emotions, fear for Leia's recovery, rage at Evelyn's cruelty, and a growing determination to see justice served. The image of Evelyn's smile, so calm and calculated amidst the courtroom chaos, fueled her resolve. That woman had underestimated Leia's strength, Marissa's love, and the power of a community that had witnessed her malice. As evening fell, the hospital's fluorescent lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. Marissa's phone buzzed with messages from neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had heard about the incident. The story had spread like wildfire, hashtags like #justice for Leia trending on social media. The public's outrage a palpable force. Marissa scrolled through the messages, her heart swelling at the support, but also aching with the knowledge that Leia's trauma was now a spectacle, a headline for the world to dissect. David arrived later, his suit rumpled from a day of frantic legal maneuvering. He sat across from Marissa, his expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. The prosecutor's confident. He said, "Evelyn's device was a custom job, illegal, dangerous, and clearly intended to harm. We've got forensic experts analyzing it, and the courtroom security footage backs up everything. The judge is furious, Marissa. He feels personally responsible for letting this happen in his court." Marissa nodded, her jaw tight. "He should," she said, her voice low, "but it's not his fault. It's hers. She planned this, David. She wanted to hurt Leia in front of everyone to show she could." David's eyes darkened. "And that's her downfall. She underestimated the backlash. The media's tearing her apart, and the HOA board is already moving to remove her. Neighbors are coming forward with their own stories of her harassment. This isn't just about Leia anymore, it's about exposing a pattern of abuse." Marissa glanced at Leia, who stirred slightly in her sleep. "What about the hearing tomorrow?" she asked. "Will Leia have to face her?" David hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's up to you and Leia. Her testimony would be powerful, but I won't push her. We have enough evidence to make a strong case without it." The prosecutors prepared to go hard. Evelyn's looking at serious prison time. Marissa's mind raced, weighing the cost of putting Leia through another ordeal against the power of her daughter's voice. She thought of Leia's courage in the courtroom, the way her cries had cut through the chaos, a testament to her resilience. "I'll ask her when she wakes up," Marissa said. "She deserves to have a say." David nodded, standing to leave. "Get some rest, Marissa. Tomorrow's going to be intense, but we're in this together. Evelyn's not walking away from this." As night settled over the hospital, Marissa sat by Leia's side, her thoughts a tangled mix of fear and hope. The trauma of the day lingered, a shadow that would follow them for years, but so too did the spark of defiance that had grown within her. Evelyn had sought to break them, to assert her control through cruelty, but she had underestimated the bond between a mother and daughter, the strength of a child who refused to be defined by her vulnerability. Leia stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mom," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I'm here," Marissa said, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Leia admitted, her lips trembling. "But I'm okay. I want to go back tomorrow. I want to tell them what she did." Marissa's heart swelled with pride, though it ached at the weight her daughter carried. "You don't have to, sweetheart. We can win this without you testifying." Leia shook her head, her eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. "No, she needs to hear me. She needs to know she didn't win." Marissa's tears fell freely now, but she smiled through them, nodding. "Okay, Leia, we'll do it together." The next morning, the courtroom was a different place, charged with a raw, electric energy. The gallery was packed, reporters lining the walls, their cameras trained on the proceedings. Evelyn sat at the defendant's table, her navy blazer replaced by a plain gray suit, her hands cuffed, her composure cracked but not broken. Her eyes still held a glint of defiance, but Marissa could see the strain, the realization that her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Leia sat in her wheelchair, her small frame straight, her hands steady despite the lingering pain. Marissa stood beside her, her heart pounding but her resolve unshakable. The judge, Richard Lanson, entered, his face etched with a grim determination that mirrored Marissa's own. He had witnessed the horror of the previous day, and his voice carried a weight of authority as he called the court to order. The prosecutor began, laying out the charges with meticulous precision. Aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and possession of an illegal device. The evidence was overwhelming: security footage, forensic analysis, witness testimonies, and the damning device itself, now in police custody. But it was Leia's testimony that silenced the room. When she took the stand, her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger with every word. She recounted the years of harassment, the poolside confrontation, the terror of the courtroom attack. Her words were clear, resonant with a courage that belied her age, and the courtroom hung on every syllable. Jurors leaned forward, their eyes wet with tears, and even Evelyn's attorney seemed to falter, his objections half-hearted. Evelyn's gaze locked onto Leia, but for the first time, Marissa saw a flicker of unease in her eyes, a crack in the mask of control. Leia's voice was a weapon, her truth a force that no amount of manipulation could counter. When she finished, the silence was deafening, broken only by the soft sobs of a juror and the rustle of papers as the prosecutor prepared to close. Marissa took Leia's hand as she returned to her side, whispering, "You were incredible." Leia's smile was small but fierce, a testament to her unbreakable spirit. The closing arguments were swift, the prosecutor's words cutting through the room like a blade. He painted Evelyn as a predator, her obsession with control, a danger to the community, her actions in the courtroom, a deliberate act of cruelty. Evelyn's attorney tried to deflect, claiming the device malfunctioned, an accident rather than intent, but the argument fell flat, drowned out by the weight of evidence and Leia's testimony. Judge Lanson delivered his ruling with a voice that trembled with restrained fury. "Miss Harper," he said, his eyes boring into her, "your actions in this courtroom were an affront to justice, a violation of the trust placed in this institution. The evidence is clear, and the harm you inflicted on a child is unconscionable. You are hereby remanded to custody, and I am recommending the maximum penalty for the charges brought against you." The gavel fell, and the courtroom erupted into murmurs, a mix of relief and disbelief. Evelyn's face remained impassive, but her hands trembled slightly, the first sign of her defeat. As she was led away in cuffs, her eyes met Marissa's one last time, but the malice was gone, replaced by a hollow resignation. Marissa and Leia left the courtroom hand in hand, the weight of the day lifting slightly with each step. The media swarmed, but David shielded them, guiding them to a waiting car. As they drove away, the sun dipping low over Maplewood, Marissa felt a fragile sense of hope. The trauma would linger, the scars both physical and emotional a reminder of Evelyn's cruelty, but they had faced her and won. Back at home, Marissa tucked Leia into bed, her daughter's eyes heavy with exhaustion, but bright with a quiet strength. "We did it, Mom," Leia whispered, her voice soft but sure. "We did," Marissa said, kissing her forehead. "And we'll keep fighting for us and for everyone she tried to hurt." As the house settled into silence, Marissa stood on the porch, the night air cool against her skin. The neighborhood felt different now. The shadow of Evelyn's control lifted, replaced by a tentative sense of community. Neighbors had begun to reach out, their own stories of harassment surfacing, a collective resolve to rebuild what Evelyn had torn apart. The nightmare was over, but the journey to healing had just begun. Marissa knew the memories would haunt them, but she also knew that Leia's courage, their unbreakable bond, and the pursuit of justice had carried them through the darkest storm. Evelyn Harper's reign of terror had ended, and in its place, Marissa and Leia would forge a future defined not by fear, but by resilience, love, and the unyielding power of truth.
If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.